Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started, go through a little quick intro before we get into the workshop, and then we'll get right into what you're all here for today, our topic, how to effectively present your research to your team, stakeholders, or anyone else that you have to share it with. So let me just do one final tech check. Just give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me. That's a lot of thumbs up. Cool. So all good there. So let's get started. My name is Joe. I'm going to be your guide, instructor for the next hour, a senior product designer and researcher, and have been for past over 10 years. And currently I'm the design advocate here at Lyssna. So in that role, I do a whole bunch of different stuff, but a lot of it is geared towards education, workshops like this, and creating material that is going to help people be successful with their research initiatives, hopefully using Lyssna, but more generally understanding how you can get research off the ground, do it successfully and efficiently, and really use it in a way that's going to lead to tangible, impactful changes to your product. And we are going to spend a lot of time talking about that stuff here today. No matter what topic we're talking about, what the focus of the workshop is, my goal is for everyone to leave this workshop with real, tangible skills and confidence to put the stuff that we do in this workshop into action. I want you to learn a lot. I want you to have some new facts and information in your brain after this workshop. But more importantly, I want you to feel like you have something to build on and can easily take the stuff that we're doing here and make some progress or get the wheels turning in whatever you're working on. I asked two big questions at the end of the workshop. Last thing before we go, did you enjoy this workshop? I'll ask that right before we sign off. I hope that if you're dedicating an hour to be here with me, listen in, taking notes, making some time during your lunch break, that you enjoy it, everything's smooth and it goes by quickly. But more importantly, do you feel like a better, more confident designer, researcher, product person than you were an hour ago? So those are my goals for this workshop. I'll ask you those at the end, and hopefully I'll see some thumbs up in the chat. All right, some quick tips for getting the most out of our workshop. First one, I'm going to share this link with everybody here in the chat, and I'll share this again at the end of the workshop. But follow Lyssna on the Figma community. I'm going to be sharing a full resource guide from this workshop with the recording, some design templates, and a bunch of further resources that'll come in a follow-up email to all of you. And that's a new initiative for us with Lyssna to get our community on Figma up and running. We have tons of great templates, presentations, useful stuff to help get you started in research. So check that out, follow Lyssna, and either way, I'll be sending out some template files and a full recap, recording, and resources from the workshop after. All right, everything is recorded. So like I said, I'll be sending all of that out after the workshop. You'll probably just get an automated email with just the recording, and then I'll send the resources out after. So that being said, you'll have this recording if you want to come back and check anything out. If you have to leave early, hop out for a minute, you'll have it all there to come back to whenever you have some free time. So everything will be recorded, and you should have that, I think, pretty quickly after the workshop's over. You'll get that sent to you. So keep an eye out. Keep the chat open and active. We've already got that covered. I think we've got a very good active chat. If you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat as we're going. I'll try to get to as many as we can. And I'm going to be throwing out some questions to the group, getting your thoughts on some stuff, opinions, maybe a couple quick 1-2 minute questions that I'll throw out there to the group. And we'll be doing that all in the chat, as well as some links and other resources that I'll be sharing with you. So keep it open. I got it. I got my monitor set up better than our last workshop. So I got the chat right in my main view here. So if anything comes up, drop it in there. I'll see it and get to it as soon as I can. Finally, stay comfortable, happy, and hydrated. Just a quick workshop today, but still make sure comfortable, got some water. If you need to get up and stretch for a second, go for it. We can catch you up on anything that you miss. And like I said, I'm going to be sending everything out after if you want to come back and take another look at it. Sound good, everybody? Yes. Nice. All right. So let's get into our topic for today, which is presenting research, our workshop title, How to Effectively Present Research to Stakeholders. We're going to start with something that you might know already or have felt already, but breaking down a little bit further the challenges and the scenarios that come up when you are presenting, talking about, or communicating things that happened in your research process and some of the unique challenges of that. Okay, so I'm going to start first with a story about a project that I worked on. This is a project that I use a lot for examples in workshops, but it was a test prep app that I worked on years ago. And it was for students studying for the GRE and GMAT to get into grad school. So basically a test prep app. This was the best screen recording of a prototype I could find here. So I'll give you the idea. But essentially it was a way for students to study, practice, and one of the main bits of focus was to really give students a clear idea of how they should be spending their time when studying. So a lot of what to work on, a lot of guidance on the areas that are where you could easily improve or score some points. And it was a big project, and there was a lot of testing involved in it, a lot of all types of studies and methodologies, but particularly what I'll focus on here were a bunch of usability studies, watching students actually complete these practice tests, create them, and give a whole lot of feedback on them. So let's see here. There was one, probably like a 2-week period where I was doing usability studies, moderated studies. So I was getting on Zoom with students. They were running through the prototype, and they were some pretty intensive usability studies. They took a while. There was a ton of feedback. Say I did about 20 to 25 of them in a 2-week period. So it was a lot. And when I was finally done, I had a meeting with the client, the team who was hiring me to build or design this. And we had 5 or 6 people from their team. And after those 2 weeks, they said to me exactly what you're seeing here. All right, Joe, how'd it go? And this is a look at what I had in front of me, except probably even more than this. This was the best thing I could find, but I had hours and hours of recordings, notes, transcripts, just a pile of feedback from these usability studies that we were doing, literally probably 30 plus hours of recording, all with really packed with feedback about this practice test prototype that we created. And so this is what I looked like here when I had basically a 30-minute meeting to recap all of that, right? I was there for all of it. I was running those studies. I was talking to people. I was seeing what was going on. And I had the material, I had the feedback. And I realized in that moment, as a younger, slightly less experienced designer, that this is going to be tough where do I even start to get through some of this stuff? And this is a challenge that I experienced a lot and still experience when coming back to research. But I think this moment was where it really clicked for me that the research is important, but also how I present it, communicate it, and relay it back to my team or stakeholders is a challenge in itself. Presenting research is tough, right? For a couple of reasons. Research findings are complex, they're nuanced, and they're often overwhelming. Just like the example I showed you, there's a lot, right? Even if you're not doing such an extensive usability study and don't have hours of recording, even if you're doing something more simple, there's a lot to cover. If your team says, hey, what happened in that research study? Give us the breakdown. Chances are that there's going to be a lot there to go over and a lot of context needed to really understand it and be able to make sense of it. Presenting research can be challenging also because of who you might be presenting it to. You might be presenting to stakeholders that are more in a business or not as hands-on product or research role, team members who aren't familiar either with the research initiative that you are doing or just the UX research process in general. So in the example I just showed you, I had a mixed audience of product manager and some people who were more familiar with it, but also the CEO of the company who's coming in totally fresh to this research study and testing that I was doing, and also in a lot of ways to the research process in general. And I think the last and one of the less, let's say, underrated reasons that it can be difficult is because in a lot of cases, at least, there's a pressure or motivation to produce results or solutions. A lot of times it feels like progress in a product is measured by the output, right? Building new things, creating new features, launching new solutions. And research sometimes can seem like a detour to that, or something that delays that output. Now, as good designers and researchers, we know that research is the shortcut or the best route to a good product. But if you're working on a team that is really focused on delivering and shipping solutions, it can be difficult to present research and maybe raise new questions when it feels like the marker of progress is to ship solutions to them. So we have all these factors that come into play when we're talking or presenting our research that makes it difficult. And I'd say, to sum it up, it's really trying to pack a lot of complex information into a short and concise and clear presentation. Not an easy task. So how you communicate and present your research findings or initiatives can affect whether or not your work actually makes an impact. If it's done poorly, like the example I showed where I was scattered and a little disorganized or overwhelmed on what to present, then a lot of those good findings and research that you did can go to waste. It can go in the old research stuff folder. Even if there are some gems in there, some really potentially game-changing insights from users, if you're not presenting it effectively, it's going to go maybe not directly in the trash, but it'll slowly fade out until there's no real action taken on it. On the other hand, if it's done well, it's going to lead to better decisions, faster action, and start to build a culture of research buy-in, really getting your team and stakeholders to see the value in research and to see it as a path towards building a great, useful product, not a kind of vague, windy road or detour to it. A lot of times you hear, or maybe have said yourself, as I have, that you have to fight for resources for research, whether that's time, budget. It can often feel like an uphill battle to get that buy-in, get approval for the time needed or the budget or resources to run a study. And I wouldn't say that's totally wrong, that you have to fight for resources, because it is the reality in a lot of cases. But to just give you a kind of a different perspective on it, there's another way to get that buy-in, which is to prove the impact of research. So not necessarily just continuously asking your manager or your team to let you do this research, or trying to find new creative ways to do it on your own or under the table ways that you could get it done, but more the approach of proving the impact. And the way that you communicate and present your work is going to be a big factor in not just convincing your team or stakeholders to let you do that research or the value of it, but to let them see it for themselves in the impact that it's having on your product. Okay, so we're going to go through how to present your research in a pretty simple 3-step framework, and I'm going to give a bunch of examples for it so you can see it in action and apply it to your own work. And we're going to use an example scenario for this workshop so we can have one kind of coherent project or role that we're working on. So we'll introduce that now and then get into some of the best practices and the keys to presenting your research. Okay, so here's our scenario. We're going to imagine that, or you're going to imagine you're a product designer, researcher at Airbnb, someone who's doing some research on the product. This is a totally made up scenario, by the way, and a little bit light on the details, but it's going to work well for some of the examples that we're showing here. So if there's anything, I don't think you'll need all the details to connect these examples and see it in action, but if you have to use your imagination a little bit, that's okay. We're going to imagine that in our role doing research for Airbnb, we've conducted 25 moderated usability studies specifically on the checkout process. So not checking out of the place that you're staying in like you would at a hotel, but the checkout, add to cart, book your stay process. So we're going to imagine that we've done these 25 usability studies. We've observed users. We've given them some tasks. We've watched them browse. We've watched how they select a place to stay. And most importantly, focused on that checkout and payment process. So just like the example I showed at the beginning, we've got hours of recording, feedback, just a ton of information coming out of this. And now, also like my example, it's time to present those findings to your team. The details of this study and the presentation, like I said, not as important because this structure and the steps that we're going to walk through are really going to apply to anything. But the idea here is that we've run our study. We got a big pile of feedback and information, and we have the challenge of being able to deliver that clearly and concisely to our team in a short amount of time, or a quick presentation. So here's what we're going to cover for this one. The keys to a great research presentation in order. We're going to start with setting the stage. We'll move into focusing on the right stuff, actually delivering the findings from our study and talking about kind of the core of what we learned and what came out of it. And we'll end with our third chapter to a great research presentation, which is making it stick, making sure that the research that you've done and the way that you've presented it is going to build some momentum. It's not going to end in that old research folder. It's going to be put into action and really lead to tangible improvements to the user experience and the business as well. Let me pause for a sec and check the chat here. Sure, we're all good. Also, as I'm sharing here, if you guys have any scenarios, things that have come up in your work, presenting research, challenges, questions like that, or even just the experience you want to put out there that might be similar to what we're talking about here, drop it in the chat. I got it open and love checking out some of those stories about things that you're working on, or even just a cosign on some of these challenges that you might have experienced yourself. Whoops. All right, cool. So let's start with the first part of a great research presentation. We've got all of these results, recordings, all this feedback and data from our usability studies for Airbnb. And we're thinking about how we want to present that to our team. The first step, as we saw in the last slide, is setting the stage. And again, no matter how good or insightful your research is, the context that you give at the beginning and the way that you frame it and present it can really make or break what happens with that research after. And this starting point is a really important one. It's simple, as you'll see, but it's going to have a huge effect on how well received your research is and whether your team's engaged and on board with it, or overwhelmed, confused, and not really sure where to focus. One of the most common mistakes in starting or doing a research presentation, specifically starting it, is what I did in the test prep example that I shared with you, which is too much, too fast, or too much, too soon in the presentation. Basically jumping right into the dense stuff, the data, charts, quotes, results, recordings. It can seem a good strategy to just get right into it, especially if you have a lot to cover. But an important thing to remember is that while you might have been totally immersed in this research and you might have created and run and conducted these studies, Your team may or may not have been involved as much as you have, or maybe not have been involved at all. So even though you understand the premise of the study and all the basics around it, your team might not. So if you jump right into stuff like you're seeing here on this slide, right? Feedback, big jams, post-it notes, recordings, that you could lose your audience right from the beginning if you're not setting it up with the proper context. So what does setting the stage mean? Providing background and goals. Why did you do this research? Sharing the method. What did you do? And connecting it to opportunity and impact. Basically, why does this matter, or why should I, as a stakeholder or teammate, care about this research? 3 pretty simple things to start your presentation. They can be done in a lot of different ways, depending on the nature or the complexity of your study, but still across the board, it's going to be the same principles and the same overarching important start, which is making sure that you're giving your team context before you just jump right into the research. Okay, so let me see if we have a question in the chat here. Aisha, when presenting to stakeholders who might not be familiar with UX or research methods, how do you balance storytelling and persuasion without oversimplifying the insights? Let's see. Slides. Yes, I can share the link to the slides. 1 sec. Share these in here. I'm going to share these after as well, but drop those. Aisha, for your question, I think I'm going to get into this I think this is going to be answered in the next section, because we'll be talking about actually sharing your findings and how to curate and focus what you're sharing and how you're communicating the actual findings. So if that doesn't get answered, bring it up again. But I think in the next section, when we actually get into showing the research, you'll get an answer to that. Okay, so for our first step, setting the stage, we're providing background, sharing the method, giving the overview and context we need quickly to make sure that our team is on board and going to understand some of the more complex or more detailed stuff that we're going to be showing in the presentation. So if we'll have some of these slides here, these Airbnb slides, where I'll be, I guess, acting out as the researcher or product designer here, presenting to my team. This is what it might look like to set the stage. First, our title slide here, our research study recap, key findings and takeaways from our recent round of moderated usability studies. And then we're getting into the background and research goals. We saw a trend, maybe through analytics, through other sources or signals, of users browsing, selecting a place, and then dropping off in the checkout flow, especially after seeing the price breakdown and right before confirming their payment. Simple setup here, and maybe oversimplified a little bit for this workshop, but not by much. The idea here is to give a little background about what the reason for this research, in this case, that we saw a lot of browsing, engagement, people finding a place that they want to book on Airbnb, but then dropping off right as they got their breakdown and needed to confirm and pay. We wanted to understand why this was happening, whether it was product related, something we could improve, or some kind of hiccup in the checkout process, environmental, something around their behavior or habits in booking a place to stay or booking travel accommodations or otherwise. We conducted 25 moderated usability studies. Participants were given a task of browsing and booking a place, and we observed, recorded them, and maybe got some popped in with a couple questions and prompts for them along the way to observe and listen to some of the feedback they had as they moved through the flow. By understanding user motivations and decision-making factors to booking, we can identify some friction points. This will help create the idea here is to create a smoother process for booking, a smoother checkout process and experience, and also related to our product goals, increase the conversion rate of new bookings. Okay, so right there, that was a pretty simple overview here, right? And like I said, maybe a little bit more simplified for this workshop. But the idea here is we're setting it up with some of the basic information about the research. we can't just dive right into quotes, videos, analytics, metrics on the studies that we have. And it might seem like something that you could skip or might seem like something that's obvious, especially if you were in it and actually conducting that research yourself. But again, you have to remember that the people on your team might not have been and probably weren't. So we're setting it up with the context about the study and also getting them bought in, like with something like this on the impact and opportunity. Hey, here's why this matters, right? This is not just for fun to test it out and see if there's anything interesting that comes up. We're seeing some signals that there are some speed bumps in this process. We're seeing it affect the conversion rate of people booking an Airbnb. If this is something we can learn more about and improve, that's going to have a lot of positive impact on the experience and our goals as a company. So don't phone it in with the intro and setting the stage to your research presentation. Don't gloss over it or just do it on the fly. This is something you really want to spend a little bit of time on before presenting your research. It's simple, it seems obvious, but it is one of the most important things you can do to make sure that everything you present after is going to resonate, stick, and get put into action. To put it simply, if you get right into the data from your research and there are people listening in that don't have the context they need to understand it, they're going to be lost from the beginning. And it's going to be very difficult to show the impact or get that buy-in for future research or to put stuff into action coming out of this research. Okay, let me check the chat real quick. So we had a couple new chats in here. Let's see, Jay. I'm about to present findings for, you don't have access to the slides. Let me check on that and I'll share with you. I am going to send them out right after, so I'll make sure everyone has access to them, but I'll do that right after the workshop. I'm about to present findings from user interview rounds, focusing on understanding our ICPs, needs, goals, hoping the findings will have a strategic impact on the roadmap. Any advice on how to make the insights land? Yes, we're going to talk about that next as we get into the actual insights, but the first step to getting them to land is what we just covered, right? Making sure that the insights are understood and that the stakeholders or team that you're presenting to have maybe an abbreviated picture of it. They're not knowing all of the motivations or details that went into it, but they are understanding the premise of the study. That's the first part, because if you don't do that well, no matter what you present after, it's not going to stick. But in the next section, I'm going to go into some more specific tips right here about how to present those findings and some tips that I've experimented with and tweaked that have been pretty successful in making sure that it actually gets traction going forward. All right, so we got our first part, simple but important, set the stage. Now we're going to move into our second part, focusing on the right stuff. We've done a good intro. We've given our stakeholders the context. We've given them the background. Everyone's on board. Everyone's following along with our research. They're not lost or getting drowned in statistics right off the bat. Now we're going to get into the actual findings, what came out of that research, and more specifically, how to present it. The goal here is pretty simple: to clearly, concisely communicate what we learned, and more importantly, as we'll see, what we want to take action on. Common mistake for presenting findings is information overload. This is pretty similar to the first one that I talked about of just jumping right into the findings. But with this part, even if you've done a good intro and provided that context, you can still overwhelm and lose your audience if you're packing in every single thing that you learned in your study, right? Here's what happened, and you've got a massive list or 156 slides like this here, detailing every single thing that came out of those usability studies. If everything is a priority, then nothing is. So one of the goals here is not just to present or regurgitate what happened in the study or dump it all in a slideshow. It's to pick and choose and prioritize the things that are really the highest priority to take action on. As I said, your job's not just to summarize what happened in the research or regurgitate it, but to curate it and prioritize it. So being able to look at a whole bunch of findings and data and things that came out of your research and choose the ones that you want to emphasize, the high impact, high priority findings. And as we'll talk about in a second, being able to keep the rest of those findings available, not just throwing everything out except the top things, but making sure that in your presentation, you're keeping it really focused on the big ones, the things that are most require action to fix a problem, solve a need, or capitalize on an opportunity that you're seeing from your research. Okay, so this is not a good example of that, right? If we're dumping everything into a messy slide like this one, I had a lot of stuff like this for our test prep app. Just tons of feedback. We have some here for our Airbnb example. It took me an extra minute to find my safe places. I like that includes pay over time options. I wish every listing had a video walkthrough, maybe someone or a group of people who just really didn't like that red button. In a study where you're getting, especially where you're getting open-ended feedback, you're going to have a lot of stuff like this. Not everyone is going to be commenting on the exact things that you're trying to learn about the checkout process. Now, again, it's not to say that this stuff isn't important, but if your presentation is packed with every single thing that you learned, it's going to be difficult to focus and redirect on the items that are going to have the biggest impact on your product. So here are some better, more focused, more higher impact ones to present. Again, making these up, but to give an example in comparison, 19 of 25 users said the final price was more than expected. So people went through the booking process, got to the end screen where they're seeing the price breakdown, and we had some feedback that it was more than expected. It might push them over budget or make them reconsider booking. Another one here, 67% of users only noticed rules or restrictions at the final step, which caused some friction, some reevaluation, or a decision not to complete the booking. And this is an actual one I found when I was putting these examples together, that it's like a friendly dog lives there. It might come in your yard or your house, but that's one of the quirks of staying at this place. So we see some findings here that people were not noticing, surprised by the price, or maybe some of the terms or rules right before they went to check out. These two themes or findings that I'm showing here are the ones that I would highlight in this example study. They have a clear tie-in to the user drop-off, right? We're seeing that drop-off at that end screen or confirmation, and we're seeing an overwhelming amount of feedback about some surprise costs or rules that are happening there at the end. So again, while the other stuff is not unimportant and shouldn't be thrown away, if we're looking to understand why people are dropping off right before the confirmation, these would be some of the things that I would want to highlight, specifically the overwhelming amount of users who were being surprised by the price and maybe reconsidering booking at it or dropping off right at that last step. So what about everything else? You're not throwing away your other findings. And I think this is one of the big challenges of presenting research and cutting down what you're presenting. As a researcher, especially if you are actually conducting the research, it's hard to do that, right? Everything feels important, and it feels like some feedback that you're getting, even if it's not totally related to the goal or the focus of your study, it's still valuable, right? So you don't want to throw that out. You don't want to leave that out of your presentation. You don't want to just not bring it up and let it disappear, because there could be something useful in it. We're not throwing it out, but we want to have a home for that research and make sure that it's available, but again, not taking center stage in our presentation, creating a big mess of findings and a lack of focus. So a great way to strike this balance is focus on the big stuff, the high impact findings, the stuff that we saw right here in the presentation. So it's staying focused and you're keeping the presentation on track about the things you want to take action on. But for everything else, you want to have a place for it and to give access to your team if they want to review that, or if it's something that might be important to come back to later. So the recording I have here is one of my favorite features in Lyssna, which is share results. If you're doing a study on Lyssna, you can just create a link to share the raw results page of any study that you're doing. In this case, it's a preference test. And I've used this a lot for this exact use case, right? I'm presenting something in a slideshow or a more cut down presentation, but I can also generate a link and include that in the presentation, basically to say, hey, here's the big stuff that we want to focus on, but there was a ton of other feedback. If you want to go see that, here's a link. You can see everything. If we need to come back to it and discuss it, we can go to that and see the raw results from our study here. So doing that in Lyssna is very easy, and it's a great way to give you peace of mind as a researcher that I can cut things down for the presentation. I can focus on the big themes that came out of our research without needing to throw out or ignore everything else that came up. I don't know, Aisha, this is where I thought might answer your question from before. Let me see, let me come back to that one. So we have presenting to stakeholders who might not be familiar. How do you balance storytelling and persuasion without oversimplifying the insights? Yeah, this is kind of what I was thinking here, Aisha, where you're keeping it focused on the big stuff and you are simplifying it in a way. You are cutting it down for the purpose of focus and gaining momentum and not overwhelming them with the findings, but also having a place where everything else lives, giving access to that and inviting your team to check it out, discuss it, and bring something up if maybe they see another bit of feedback or another theme that came from that you didn't highlight in your presentation. So let me know if that helps. All right, we're going to get down to our last piece of the puzzle here. We've done first setting the stage, giving the context and the background, opportunities, the why, getting our team on board, getting everyone on the same page, gone through sharing our findings, and some of the key aspects of doing that being to cut it down to the big high impact ones, not overwhelming them with everything you learned, but also being able to give them access or visibility to some of the other things that came up in your study. The last chapter of a great research presentation is making it stick. Basically, now that you've heard the findings and understand what came out of this research and some of the big themes, what are we going to do next? How are we going to not only just digest this information or understand it, but put it into action to lead to real product improvements? What happens next? If you do, I said on this slide, even if you do everything else well, but I would say especially if you do everything else well, if you do a good job on those first two sections, then even more so, the end of your presentation is going to have your audience thinking, okay, what do we do next? When I was making this slide, I was thinking of like those old antivirus ads where it would like scan your computer and say, you have 100 viruses, buy this product here. If we don't do a good job, if we do a great job of identifying the problems and communicating them to our team and then just drop off after that, it's like opening up this can of worms of all possible things we could improve, but not really giving the next steps or solutions. So the way that you close out your presentation with next steps is really going to be a key in making sure that there's follow through on it. And the best way to do this is to provide clear next steps. So you're wrapping up your presentation by making some suggestions or recommendations. Again, this is going to depend on the nature of your study, your role, your team, but as a fundamental part of it, you're trying to leave that presentation with some specific and actionable next steps to put it into action or keep up the momentum. These are usually could be follow-up research, recommending additional research that needs to be done, design directions or solutions. So maybe suggesting some possible features that you could begin creating to address some of the things that came up in your research. Those are, I'd say, the most common ones in terms of next steps and action items, either further research or solutions. But no matter what those next steps are, the key is that they have to be specific and actionable. So if there are no next steps, your research just vanishes in thin air. Even if you do a great job of presenting everything else, if you don't take your team through what has to happen next and just leave it there, no matter how good that research is, it's not going to be used to improve your product. And the next best thing is vague next steps, right? You're giving some next steps and saying, hey, here's what we should do coming out of this research based on these findings, but not being specific enough. And if you do this, your research and the outcomes of those findings might not vanish into thin air, but they're going to slowly fade away over the next few days. If there's not a specific call to action for follow through on it, chances are it's going to fade out and never really get used to improve the product. Maybe a little bit more slowly, but it'll still be stuck in that old research folder that I showed at the beginning of the workshop. Okay, so going back to our Airbnb presentation here, if we wanted to do additional research, right, coming out, this is an example of some next steps that are too vague. Next steps, conduct a competitive analysis of other checkout flows. It is a next step. It's better than nothing. It could be the right direction to help improve our checkout flow based on these findings and the key theme of people being unpleasantly surprised by the last screen, but it's too vague to really get traction. A much better, more specific example of the same thing would be, or way to communicate the same thing would be what we're seeing here. Again, totally made up, but just to give you an idea. The next steps being to choose 5 similar competitive companies with comparable pricing structures, maybe other sites where you're booking a place to stay. Next step would be to audit or do competitive analysis on their checkout flows to see how they communicate fees and pricing transparency throughout. Let's screenshot or document key patterns we might be able to adapt to our flow. We might be able to borrow and put into Airbnb and discuss it next week. This is suggesting the same thing, right? Hey, let's go see how other sites are allowing users to see a clear price breakdown before they get to the checkout. But the way that it's communicated here, it is 10 times as likely to get put into action, to gain some momentum, and to actually result in an improvement to the product, simply because it's more specific. Another example here, if your next steps were to work towards a solution to some of the findings that came out of your research, this would be too vague. Let's design a new order summary page based on the feedback. It's a next step, but again, too vague to really get any traction. A much better way to communicate the same thing would be something like this. Let's wireframe or design or prototype 5 ideas for a persistent order summary or cart widget, something that people can see throughout and see a clear breakdown of the pricing. Let's review them and decide on one for usability testing in the next sprint. Same idea, right? Let's come up with a new feature to increase price transparency or solve this problem. But the way that we're communicating it, again, 10 times as likely if you're presenting something like this, that it's going to be acted on and eventually result in an improvement to your product. A couple extra tips for making it stick. First one is assigning action items and owners where possible. So even going a step beyond some of the examples that I just showed you and figuring out who's going to do what. This can be a small, minor next step. It doesn't have to be a full redesign of a certain feature. But if it's actionable and you're assigning that to someone, creating ownership, a plan, accountability, a timeline, in whatever way you can. That's going to make it more likely that those initial steps of acting on it actually happen. And again, that there's follow through and momentum to turn that research into product improvements. Opening the floor to discussion, asking both targeted and open-ended questions to your team. Maybe, hey, do you guys have any thoughts on other products we could look at to get some inspiration for the checkout flow or for how they're breaking down pricing? And as I've said a couple of times throughout, giving the research and discussions a home. Lyssna is a great place for that, for the results of your research. But Fig Jams, Slack threads, somewhere where there's a space to discuss it, there's visibility over the research, and there's a place and permission and encouragement for your team to participate with it. So all of these, taking those specific next steps and really putting these little things behind them that are going to make a huge difference in whether or not they go in one ear and out the other, or they turn into action and ultimately lead to a better product and solutions to some of the challenges that came up in your research. All right, let me check the chat here, and then we're going to do some key takeaways and wrap up for the day. So we got a lot of good stuff in here. All right, Lisette had a good chat here. I always directly connect insights to recommendations because stakeholders always directly want to know, how can we fix this and how much effort will it cost to fix this? Yes, you got it. Listen here, let me give you the flame emoji on that one too. Yes, and that's what we're talking about here. Now you can play around with the level of depth of the chapters or the pieces to a presentation that I'm showing here, but that connection that you're making and the buy-in that you're getting from it, yes, that is a vast majority of the times, that's what your team is looking for, right? And that's what you're ultimately trying to get to, is a fix. How do we improve this? Once you've got them bought in on the importance of it, how do we improve this? What's it going to take to do it? And how do we get started? So with those recommendations, the closer you can tie them to insights, the better. And the closer you can tie them to outcomes that your team or stakeholders actually care about, the better as well. So if you're able to do those things and you have a formula for doing it or presenting it, that's going to get you a lot further than just leaving them out there and hoping someone chimes in on what to do about it. Let's see some others. Christina said, my approach to walking the team through results is to have a summary slide. Perfect. What, so what, and now what? Yes. And mine, I had it worded in this presentation as what, basically, what, why should I care, and what's next? Same idea here. Let's hit that 101 for you, Christina. Awesome. And let me just get to Seth's before we wrap up here. Will a recording be sent out later? Yes. I don't know if you're still here, Seth, but it'll be sent out right after, along with the resources and a shareable link to the slide, so all you guys can access that. Excellent. Since we have 5 more minutes here, I want to go through just our 3 quick key takeaways before we wrap up. I think this one's pretty obvious, but I'm hoping that you were able to see it through the presentation today. How you communicate and present your research and your design work really matters. And more specifically, it's make or break as to whether that research gets used and put into action, or is you're leaving good stuff on the table or in the old research folder. Even if you are doing really good research, even if you're uncovering really potentially valuable insights and problems that you could fix to improve your product, taking the time and having a game plan and some clarity to present it using the setup we showed here is going to be a major factor, no matter how good or useful the research behind it is. Prove it and fight for resources for research. Like I said earlier, many times you do have to lead the charge and take it into your own hands to get the resources, budget, time, etc. for research. So that's still part of it. I won't say that's something that completely disappears. But if you can put the stuff we did today into action and deliver some really concise, clear, compelling presentations, and then see the follow-up of it and let your stakeholders see the follow-up and the improvements that come out of it, that's going to go a long way in not only getting the results and the benefit from that study that you did, but building that long-term buy-in in research. Synthesize and focus. So many of the common mistakes and themes and examples I showed here today all came down to the same thing, which was a big information dump or regurgitation of what happened. It can be tempting to do that because as a researcher, you think all of this could be important. There's nothing we want to leave out of it. I don't want to oversimplify it, but you want to take the time. But if you do that, you're going to lose the focus and the momentum behind it. So make sure that you're taking time to not only just deliver what happened in the research, but to really highlight the highest priority, highest impact findings that your team can act on. The reality is, if you're showing everything, your team and everyone's going to lose sight of what they can take action on and probably just be overwhelmed with what's next. So you don't have to throw it out. You can have a home for it. You can link them to a Lyssna results page. You can give them access to everything. But for that presentation, really try to remember that people have limited bandwidth. Your team is not going to be able to fix or even comprehend all the different things that need to happen. Your job as a researcher is to look at it, take the lead, and say, hey, here's everything that came out, but here are the big things that really we believe could have the biggest impact on our goals and the reason why we did this research in the first place. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up since we got 2 minutes left, but let me know in the chat, did you enjoy this workshop? I hope it was a good, useful hour of your time. I hope if you're doing some research or presenting some in the near future, that this was a worthwhile hour to give you some structure and some context around it. And more importantly, my other big question, do you feel like better, more confident designer, researcher, presenter than you were an hour ago? I'm going to share the template for presenting. It's something that you can modify. It's something that includes all of the notes and tips that we have in here. Something that you can scale up or down or tweak in terms of the nature of your study and who you're presenting to. But I hope that after seeing the foundation today and these 3 key aspects where a lot of research presentations go wrong, you're feeling like you have a little bit more structure. You're not feeling like me presenting my test prep research where I just really had no idea where to begin, but that you've got to see the importance of these main building blocks of a great presentation and what it takes to put that research into action. Let's check the chat here. Good. Awesome presentation. I'll be sending everything out after the workshop, slides, recording, further resources, templates, stuff like that. So you'll get the recording right after, but I will follow up at some point tomorrow with all the resources. If you're here and registered for this workshop, you will get everything that comes after. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again for joining, and hopefully I'll see you in another workshop soon.